24th?
Okay. I wasn't sure if
Oh,
you...
it says April 10th on here. I did read it. Yeah, good catch, Councilmember Zurin. It is Wednesday, April 24th, and I called the meeting to order. So how's that? We do like Groundhog Day. So welcome. First item is approval of agenda. The first order of business is approving the agenda. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Okay. There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. The motion is adopted. Approval of minutes. Approval of the April 10th meeting minutes. Can I have a motion and a second for approval?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion. Is there any discussion? Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The motion is adopted. Next, we have the public invitation, and this is an invitation to interested persons to address the council on matters not on the agenda. Public comment on the agenda items has occurred in the respective committees, and so I know Liz Sund, who is our recording secretary, has the list, and is there anybody on there tonight?
No.
No. So we don't have anybody in terms of public comment. Is there anybody? We'll just ask in the audience if there's anybody here. Okay, so we will move on to the next item, which is business items. The first is 2019-55, which is the Unified Budget Amendment for 2019, the first quarter. And this will be a roll call vote, members. That's where they will call each of your names. This is going to be present. So, okay. Councilmember Ferguson will present this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is business item 2019-30, Unified Budget Amendment. Council has a quarterly amendment process for its budget. Budget amendments are heard individually in the respective operating committee and as a whole in the management committee before coming before the council. This amendment includes proposed changes to both the operating and capital components of the unified budget and reflects items from the transportation and community development committees. On the capital side of the unified budget, divisions are proposing routine adjustments to remove completed projects from the authorized capital program and to move projects from the capital improvement plan to the authorized capital program. Projects moving to authorized have funding secured. Community development is proposing to remove $14.2 million in completed projects and bringing $1.5 million additional funding and projects into the authorized capital program. Funding includes replacing project funding from previously awarded environmental and natural resources trust funds with state general obligation bonds awarded in this legislative session and adding new funds for interest earnings and bond proceeds. The state GO bonds are allocated to each park agency by formula set in state statute. Transportation is proposing to remove $15.4 million in completed projects and move nearly $25 million in projects where federal, state, local, and regional funding have been secured from plan to authorized. On the operating side of the unified budget, the Transportation Division is proposing to transfer and exchange motor vehicle sales tax revenues from the operating budget with federal revenues in the capital program. The federal revenues are eligible to fund operating expense, and the MVST funds will be used in the capital program to fund projects that are not eligible by council policy to be funded with regional bonds because they do not result in a new fixed asset and have a useful life shorter than the bond maturity. For example, engines, transmission, midlife vehicle rehabilitations. This amendment has been reviewed and approved by the Transportation, Community Development, and Management Committees. The motion is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the amendment of the 2019 Unified Budget as indicated in accordance with the attached tables.
Okay, thank you for the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay. Seeing none, I will have Liz please call the roll.
Okay. Councilmember Johnson, absent. Councilmember Chambliss, absent. Councilmember Ferguson.
Aye.
Councilmember Barber.
Aye.
Councilmember Cummings.
Aye.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson.
Aye.
Councilmember Lilligren.
Aye.
Councilmember Musse.
Aye.
Councilmember Zurin.
Aye. Oh, sorry.
Councilmember Lindstrom.
Aye.
Councilmember Vento.
Aye.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Aye.
Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
Councilmember Fredson. Councilmember Sterner.
Aye.
Councilmember Wolf.
Aye.
Chair Swallow.
Aye. So hearing ayes all, the motion is carried. So thank you, and thank you for your report, Councilmember Ferguson. We do not have a consent agenda today, so we will move right into the reports of standing committees. So Councilmember Lilligren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My apologies for being late. Madam Chair and council members, the first action brought forward by the Community Development Committee is a grant project scope change for the Mississippi Regional Trail. And Dakota County requests that the Metropolitan Council approve the grant project scope change for unexecuted parks grant SG-22058 to change the project from the Mississippi River Regional Trail construction project to the Lake Billisby Regional Park construction improvements. This grant uses both state bond funds. The Metropolitan Council has not executed the original grant agreement with Dakota County. Dakota County experienced numerous project complexities regarding trail acquisition, design, and engineering that delayed the original Mississippi Regional Trail project. As such, the county has not used funds connected with the original proposed project. Instead, Dakota County proposes to change the project to implement improvements at Lake Billisby Regional Park. The components of the proposed improvements are comprehensively defined in the Lake Billisby Park Regional Park Master Plan, which the council approved on May 23, 2018. This request was approved unanimously at the April 4, 2019 Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission meeting and the meeting of April 15, 2019 Community Development Committee meeting. So, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council approve the grant project scope change for Dakota County Grant Agreement SG 20-22058 to modify the project from the Mississippi River Regional Trail Construction Project to the Lake Billisby Regional Park Construction Improvements.
Thank you, Councilmember Lilligren. There is a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, hearing a second. Is there any further discussion? All those, Councilmember Sterner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question. Where was the trail for the Mississippi River going to go previously?
Councilmember Lilligren.
And I would turn to staff, Madam Chair.
So I'll ask staff to come up. So our Community Development Director, Lisa Barajas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, council members. Mississippi River Regional Trail in Dakota County is meant to run along that northern portion of the county, right along the Mississippi River, connecting, I believe, Spring Lake Park Reserve, and going along there. There's a lot of property owners in that area, lots of acquisition problems that they had run into. They're still going to move forward with the project. They're not going to scrap it, but they do think that they would not be able to complete the project within the timeframes required by the grant.
Okay.
Councilmember Sterner.
Just a follow-up question. There also is a trail looking at going from Egan, Lebanon Hills out to the river straight through Flint Hill land. Is that still in the works of looking at it as an option of other trail system with wildlife and bicycle trail, et cetera?
Ms. Barajas.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Sterner, I believe Dakota County talks about, but Councilmember Wolf probably knows more about this one than I do.
Okay.
Okay. Any Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That trail will connect with the Mississippi Regional Trail as well. There's several trails that come together in that area, but this one section is really difficult to get through. It's in a kind of an industrial park area, and there's railroad right-of-ways that you have to cross and a lot of complexity there. So rather than do something where they'd not be able to get it done in time, they're just shifting their order of work. They're still working on the other trail, and I believe the connection is between it's a portion of the trail between Spring Lake Regional Park and the Pine Bend Trailhead.
Ms. Barajas. Any
Madam
further
Chair,
comments?
Councilmember, that's
Thank you. Anything else? All right, thank you. So there is a motion on the floor for business item 2019-68. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. And your next item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Community Development Committee brings a second item for consideration today. It's a comprehensive plan, the Dakota County 2040 Comprehensive Plan. This is a single business item. It did not go through joint committees because Dakota County does not connect to the regional wastewater system and therefore only went through the Community Development Committee. Thrive MSP 2040 forecast growth of over just under 34,000 new households in the community through 2040 and an increase of over 32,000 jobs. In the northern portion of the county, Thrive designates the first ring suburbs as urban center. The second ring communities along the Minnesota River are considered urban and suburban. The third and fourth ring communities have been designated suburban edge and emerging suburban edge, and a few small standalone communities are either rural, diversified rural, or rural residential. The rest of the county has an agricultural designation. Dakota County does not have land use planning authority and therefore has different plan requirements than cities and townships in the region. And the counties are responsible for transportation planning and park planning. Dakota County is one of 10 regional parks implementing agencies, and the county's plan must still be consistent with the other council's policies as described in the staff report. Council staff find that the county's 2040 plan confirms to regional systems plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. So, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record and take the following actions. Authorize Dakota County to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, and to advise the county to adopt the Mississippi River Corridor Critical Area component of their 2040 comprehensive plan within 60 days after receiving the final approval from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and submit a copy of the final adopted plan and evidence of adoption to the DNR Council and National Park Service within 10 days of adoption.
Thank you, Councilmember Lilligren. Good report. There's a motion for business item 2019-80. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The motion is adopted. Thank you. Next on the agenda, environment, there is no report, correct? Okay.
No report.
Management? No report?
No additional report.
Okay. Transportation, Councilmember Barber?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have 4 reports on the agenda this evening. Madam Chair, council members, business item number 2019-69 is regarding the declaration of 2425 Minnehaha Avenue as surplus and the sale of that property to At Last Gourmet Foods Incorporated for $1,650,000. 2425 Minnehaha Avenue will be vacated during the summer of 2019. The facilities analysis identified no near-term council use for the property. A market analysis revealed private sector interest in the property. On December 17, 2018, the procurement department issued an invitation for bids to purchase the property. The bidding process closed at the end of February 2019. The highest bid was from At Last Gourmet Foods for the amount of $1,650,000. The real estate policy allows the council to dispose of surplus property at market value or below if it advances the council's priorities or objectives. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council declare the real property at 2425 Minnehaha Avenue surplus and authorize the regional administrator to quitclaim the property to At Last Gourmet Foods for $1,650,000.
Thank you. There is a motion for business item 2019-69. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The motion passes. Your next item?
Madam Chair, council members, business item number 2019-77 same week is regarding a controlled access approval request by MnDOT for 2 projects along I-94 in the cities of Rogers, Dayton, and Maple Grove. This approval is needed to find that these projects are consistent with the region's transportation policy plan as required by Minnesota statute before construction begins. The projects include a new interchange along I-94 east of the current Brockton Lane overpass and added lanes along I-94 between Minnesota Highway 610 and Minnesota Highway 101 in each direction. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council approve a request by the Minnesota Department of Transportation to add lanes along I-94 between Minnesota 610 and Minnesota 101 and construct a new full access interchange east of the existing Brockton Lane overpass, subject to further review and approval by the Metropolitan Council if there are significant changes in the design of the proposed project.
Okay, thank you. There is a motion on business item 2019-77. Is there any further discussion?
Second?
Ah.
You had the motion, you needed a
Okay,
second.
that is right. Is there a second? Second. Okay, by Councilmember Wolf. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Johnson was unable to be here this evening. This is in her district, and she did attend the public hearing, but she had a conflict from before she ever joined the council that she wasn't able to get out of. So she asked me to express her apologies for not being here tonight, and also that she strongly supports this project.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion is adopted. Your next item?
Madam Chair, council members, business item number 2019-85 same week is regarding Amendment 2 to the Transportation Policy Plan. This amendment amends the Gold Line locally preferred alternative in Woodbury to extend the line 0.3 miles and adds a new terminus station, and amends the I-94 highway reconstruction project in Maple Grove and Rogers to include general purpose lanes between Dayton Parkway and Highway 101. Policy plan amendments are required to remove or add regionally significant projects to the plan and to maintain fiscal constraint. This amendment changes the scope of two projects already in the plan. The amendment was open for public comment on February 27th and closed on April 12th. A public hearing was held on April 2nd. Over 300 people engaged in some form on the projects, primarily through social media and community meetings. 5 formal public comments were received, 2 in support of the Gold Line project, 2 in support of the I-94 project, and 1 requesting information on how the council identifies transitway priorities. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council accept the summary of public comments and adopt Amendment Number 2 to the Transportation Policy Plan to amend the Gold Line project to extend the line and add a new station in Woodbury, and amend the I-94 highway project to include general purpose lanes from Dayton Parkway to Highway 1 in Maple Grove and Rogers.
Thank you. There is a motion on business item 2019-85. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion is passed. And last, we have your fourth item.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and we're almost there. So Madam Chair, council members, business item number 2019-86, same week, is regarding the amendment of the 2019 through 2022 Transportation Improvement Program to change the cost and description of MnDOT's I-94 concrete overlay project and to add an associated project for temporary widening and crossovers. This amendment is needed to update the project description and the total cost of this 2020 project on I-94 between Maple Grove and Rogers. Cost estimates have increased to $124,600,000. Additional project scope includes adding rest area work and weigh-in motion technology. Also needed as part of this amendment request is the addition of new 2019 project to complete temporary lane widening and crossovers prior to construction of MnDOT's I-94 project to add lanes between Highway 610 and 101. The total project cost for this new project, SP number 2780-99, is $11,300,000. The project is funded with state bonds funds. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council concur with the Transportation Advisory Board action to amend the 2019 through 2022 Transportation Improvement Program to change the cost and description of MnDOT's I-94 concrete overlay project and to add an associated project for temporary widening and crossovers.
Thank you. There is a motion on 2019-86. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The item is passed, so thank you. Next, we have two business items. The first is the 2019-21 appointment to the Land Use Advisory Committee. As a chair of the Metropolitan Council, I am excited to make recommendations for appointments for all district openings on the Land Use Advisory Committee, also known as LUAC. LUAC provides advice and assistance to the council on regional land use and comprehensive planning and in matters of metropolitan significance as requested by the council. The council received 53 applications for the council's districts 1 through 16 and interviewed candidates on April 9th and 10th. The applicants represented a very strong pool of candidates of both community members and elected officials. I would also like to thank council members Wolf, Johnson, and Lindstrom for serving on the nominating committee panel. I move that the Metropolitan Council approve the following appointments to the Land Use Advisory Committee. And it's possible that some of them might be in the audience. Do I need to read all of them? Okay. So I am not going to read their names. I think that they have been informed. Is that correct?
They have been informed. They're in the
Okay.
business item.
Okay. So I approve the following appointments, District 1 through District 16. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Okay. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to say we had a tremendous slate of candidates applying for this job. It was a very hard decision to choose because there were so many qualified people. And staff is reaching out to people who weren't chosen that are highly qualified to see if we can keep them active in other council activities because we don't want to lose their knowledge.
Excellent. Councilmember Sterner.
I just was looking at the list and I don't see anyone for District 2. Could you explain what the status of District 2 is?
Yes, we had a question about that before, and that's the Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We only had one applicant from District 2, and so we're reaching out for additional applicants so that we can have a pool of people to interview rather than just one.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Let's see. The motion is we just need to vote on it, correct? So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, all right. So it passes, and we have our new LUAC appointments. The second business item is 2019-92 appointments to the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission. Additionally, I have recommendations for this commission for the openings in District E, F, G, and H. The Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission helps the council develop a long-range plan and an acquisition and development program that includes funding priorities for regional parks. The council received 15 applications for 4 openings and interviewed candidates on April 15th. Again, we had a really strong pool of candidates from each district. I'd like to thank Councilmember Linnea Atlas Ingebrigtsen, Councilmember Francisco Gonzalez, current, now is it MPAS, Chair Tony Yaruso, and Jenna Fletcher from the Trust for the Public Land for serving on the nominating committee. Okay. I move that the Metropolitan Council approve the following appointments to the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission. It's District E, F, G, and H. So the motion is there. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. It's moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried. So I know it's been very exciting, right? And lots of meetings to appoint all these new people, and I think it's really great to see this moving forward. So thanks to everybody for their efforts and welcome to the new members. That brings us now to other business. Now we will hear our first information item, an overview of the public engagement plan presented by Michelle Fury. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. I have a gift for you, copies of the public engagement plan, so I'm going to send those around for your reference. Thank you for the opportunity to come tonight and tell you a little bit about our public engagement plan, which really serves as the overarching policy for our public engagement work. My goal tonight is to make sure that we give you some basics about how we created this plan, and the roots of it are really in Thrive MSP 2040, so I'll spend a little bit of time on that, how that all came to be. And then to talk a little bit about how this plays out in our work from formal, engagement, things like public hearings, to what's really more community-based engagement, to make sure that we're getting the right voices to your decision-making processes, to make sure that you're supported and that you get the information you need. And before we conclude today, we'll have a couple of things for you to think about as we move forward. This plan, as you'll see, was first initiated, and we've been using it since September 2015. So it is probably due for a little bit of a refresh. So we'll be looking at some topics for discussion there as well. So Thrive MSP 2040, as I mentioned, the roots for this public engagement plan really came from the process to create our regional plan. And the process for that last regional plan was pretty extensive in terms of making sure that we heard from the range of people who were interested in what our long-range plan was for this region. And there were many organizations that came both to the council here in this room and presented to the group in the committee of the whole format, but also many stakeholders externally that were involved in small group discussions, large-scale meetings that involved, various topics, and were really actively involved in the Thrive process. It was more than 2,000 people were actually involved in that process, and that may not seem like a very big number of people, but when you're talking about a long-term plan that's way up here, it's definitely a thing that isn't creating controversy on the street in front of people's houses, right? So it's a little bit more difficult to get people involved. But one of the things that we heard certainly, and the Thrive outcomes are all in front of you. And if Libby Starling was here to talk about this, she would say that they all need to live in balance with one another. So I will continue to channel that. But the point is that there are so many different interests that we're weighing when we're talking about regional policy, that they all need to sort of live in harmony. And there are certainly ways that they balance each other out. But one of the other things that was significantly different about this whole process is what people in this region really wanted to see in the plan. The idea was that it's really truly a regional plan, as opposed to just the council's sort of vision for development in the region moving forward. And as a result of that, we had a lot of people involved. And the equity outcome is the one that I'll talk most about today, because that is the piece where the public engagement aspects really play themselves out. So one of the things that we heard from people was that we needed to change the way we involve the public and stakeholders in our decision making, not just at the regional planning level, but throughout all of the different things that we do here at the council. And that came through loud and clear in that Thrive MSP 2040 process. It also came through loud and clear with a couple of cross-sector collaborations that the council was involved with. One of them was called Corridors of Opportunity, which was part of a sustainable communities grant that came from the federal government, and also leveraged a lot of private philanthropy to really seed a discussion around engagement and transit development and development generally. And because there were so many people from different sectors coming together, they recognized the value of all those different voices at the table in decision making. And the power of that actually transcended that effort. It lasted many years after that, and there's certainly still relationships that are leveraged as a result of those conversations. And the other thing that we heard loud and clear was that we really needed to focus on the impact on people in the region, and not just things, right? When we plan, we talk a lot about things. We talk a lot about facilities when we mean roads and bridges and transit, right? But they're things. So we need to reinvigorate the conversations with the perspectives of people and the voices of people. So ultimately, engagement, we also started to shift our language away from outreach to engagement, because engagement connotates a two-way relationship where you're actually having some give and take in your conversations, and the decisions are shared decisions for the good of the region and the people in the region. Though you are all the policymakers that are making those decisions, ultimately you want to hear how that's going to impact the people in the region as well. That really changed through this process, and we made the specific reference to the fact that engagement needs to support the policymaking, right? That it can't just be because we have to do it or because it's a thing that's coming along. It actually needs to answer critical questions that the policymakers need to know, and it needs to identify the key issues that are pervasive in the marketplace of ideas. So some of the specific things that we learned are that we need to value experience and expertise. And that's not just from people who are paid to come before us all the time to be a part of those decisions, but there are lived experiences of people in the region that matter in the decisions that we make. We need to meet people where they are, so we need to not assume they can come to a meeting at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, but there are other times when we need to make sure that they're able to participate in processes, and often that looks very different for different groups of people. We need to show the value of participation, meaning this is something that people are willing to spend their valuable time, which is a precious resource to all of us, in doing. We need to plan with constituents and not just for them, and that is certainly more complicated than in the past eras we've done. But it does make the vision then something that we can all own and all support. That goes along with sharing agenda setting. So when you have an idea around what a project needs to do and be, it isn't just the organizational point of view; it's also the community point of view. We should expect collaboration and build capacity when we're doing engagement. So we're not just expecting people to show up and tell us things, but we're recognizing that they can learn and grow. And especially when you're partnering with community organizations, recognizing that it's not just for the benefit of the council, but it's for the benefit of the people that they represent in those organizations as well. And then the last piece, and this is something that I say a lot, so you might hear me say it again, authentic engagement really does take time. And sometimes our timelines are not long enough to really get deep into some of the issues that we need to understand. That doesn't mean that we aren't building on something. So if there is a time limited situation where a decision absolutely needs to be made on a certain timeline, that it's important to be at least aware and flexible in terms of the long-term conversation, that there's always somewhere we can grow from something. And when we might decide something on a particular day, we still have other things that we can address down the road. One of the things that we heard a lot about from community folks who both participated in the Corridors of Opportunity project, as well as a handful of capital projects that were going on at the time, including the construction of the Green Line, was that trust is something that is an ongoing relationship, that you have to be constantly nurturing that trust and nurturing that expectation. And it's one thing to be an organization and be dealing with people, but it's another thing to actually authentically try to note that is a long-term conversation. And one of the things that we are constantly thinking about as an organization is how do we balance garnering attention for decision making and for engagement with those authentic relationships and connections. So we might not be talking every day about being out in community and meeting with people, but at the same time, we are out constantly meeting with people, and so are you, and those relationships matter too. So being able to leverage all of those things without constantly having to say, this is a promotional opportunity as opposed to just a relationship building opportunity. So as I mentioned, this all came out of the Thrive 2040 equity outcome. And this is the specific text from the document that calls for engaging a full cross-section of the community in decision-making and then officially creating a council-wide public engagement plan. So this was all happening concurrently with the Corridors of Opportunity project, and we were hearing from community in both of those processes. There was another thing that was also going on at the time that I'll just speak about briefly in a minute, that was a little bit of it it was an ad hoc committee that was created by Chair Susan Haig at the time to go a little bit more deeply into some of the operational practices around engagement and our advisory committees here at the council. So all of those things came together, and we agreed that there were critical things that we needed to create and just solidify in a document so that we knew what our values were moving forward. And that really did reflect a new approach to engagement. And as I mentioned, this came out of the Corridors of Opportunity and the Thrive project, but there is a group of community organizations that were part of that Corridors of Opportunity project called the Community Engagement Steering Committee. They still meet. They were initially created to disperse grant funds that was part of that Corridors of Opportunity project, but they have really been thought leaders around engagement in the region and have provided a lot of pretty critical information to not just the council, but to governments across the region as well. And they're really partners in community with the council in these conversations. So as I mentioned, Chair Susan Haig created this ad hoc committee in 2013 that asked three critical questions. What changes do we need to make to our public engagement practices? How do we diversify our advisory committees and make sure that there are more voices from across the region in those processes? And then should we create an equity advisory committee? And that group met off and on for a little over a year and a half, and ultimately decided that some of the concurrent conversations that we're having with the public engagement plan should be implemented at the council. How to diversify advisory committees included recruiting differently and creating some of the processes that you all have been experiencing this time around, which are a little bit more intentionally targeting the different groups of the different community organizations ahead of a full recruitment so that we know where we might actually get some good candidates from. And then, of course, in 2015, the council created an equity advisory committee, which still operates today. When the council decided that we needed to create the public engagement plan, we actually began meeting with community organizations and that community engagement steering committee to first sort through some of the things that had not gone well in their points of view for many months, and then to really create a shared definition of engagement and to create some shared principles for engagement. So if you pull out your public engagement and open to the middle, it's really conveniently located. There is a double-page spread that identifies the key public engagement principles and talks a little bit about some of these definitions. And these principles were created concurrently by the council members at the time and the members of this local community organizations and engagement professionals that we got together. So there were concurrent conversations and in some cases collaborative conversations to create all of these principles. So I think there's tremendous power in having a public engagement policy that has community voices embedded in it. They were involved in writing this, they were involved in elevating these principles and in really defining what they all mean in a way that is pretty, it's certainly practical and useful, and we found it very helpful in focusing our work. But the fact that all the policymakers at the council level and these community representatives all agreed that these were the principles for engagement is something that we're really grateful for having that opportunity to have that conversation. If you have any questions about the specific principles themselves, I certainly can answer those questions, but just wanted you to know that that was something that happened collaboratively. As you see, I'm just running through them. The equity, respect, transparency, relevance, accountability, collaboration, inclusion, and cultural competence. The idea behind all of these things, of course, is to elevate the lenses that we should be looking through as we plan engagement and execute engagement. But ultimately, there are a handful of things that also respond to the feedback that we heard from all of the folks that participated in the Thrive process and the Corridors of Opportunity. It really encapsulates where the issues were and where the focus needs to be moving forward. So the idea behind the public engagement plan is that it supports the work that we do and the decisions that the council members and the advisory committees make. this is how it plays out in our work. We have project-based engagement, so things like um, the uh, the transportation policy plan amendment that you all approved today. That is project-based engagement, and there are federal and state regulations that govern the work that we do when we amend the transportation policy plan. So we dedicate time and effort to making sure that those things happen. And the transportation policy plan is a great example of a more formal process where we have to have a public hearing, a public comment process, and then all of the information gets put into a report and brought to you for consideration. There's long-term policy development. So all of the council policy documents have a similarly formal process that they all undergo. So the transportation policy plan, Thrive MSP 2040, the housing policy plan, the water resources policy plan, the regional parks policy plan, and to some degree the water supply plan all go through this process. We have chosen to make some consistency decisions about those processes. So they all have public hearings, they all have formal public comment processes. But many years before those documents are put together, we actually are engaging stakeholders in what the policy should look like. That is something that all council members get involved with as well. So it is not like we just write the plan, send it out, and have the formal public processes. We actually make sure that stakeholders in community and in the industry, in the case of housing or transportation, for example, are all a part of those conversations as well. There's usually a critical involvement with the advisory committees as well. So for the transportation policy plan, for example, the Transportation Advisory Board is a critical partner in making that happen. For the Parks Policy Plan, the Parks and Open Space Commission is a critical partner. So those advisory committees play a pretty important role in making sure that the stakeholders are engaged and that there are regular updates about the progress that's being made on that long-term policy development. As I mentioned, there are formal processes, and in addition to this public engagement plan, we have some administrative processes and policies that govern the public hearings that we have, for example, with time to make sure that we are able to notice those meetings and inform the public about them. And that really involves things like public hearings or open houses or things like that. But we're really striving to do more than just those formal engagements around our processes and really try to make sure that we're having conversations with stakeholders that are either traditionally not a part of our planning processes or are otherwise affected by the processes. And one of these things that one of the things that you'll see in the public engagement plan is an acknowledgement that when you're planning engagement for community, you need to make sure you know how they want to be engaged in a question. So don't just assume that they want a series of open houses if they really can't attend those open houses. Make sure that you're actually plugging into the affected parties with your planning process before you even go out and do that engagement. So that is one of the other things that we've been trying to do in an ongoing way, is to make sure that we're strategically reaching out and building relationships with both organizations, but members of community or aspects of community, so that we are prepared to ask questions, especially if we don't have a whole lot of time. I'll give you an example. It's been almost 2 years now, we were aware that we were going to need to create some additional revenue and raise transit fares. No one really was happy about the idea that we were going to have to discuss that very issue, because it's a difficult issue. It's something that has impact on people. We didn't have a whole lot of time to do a lot of engagement. But the time that we did have, we could plug into existing relationships. And one of the things that we had the advantage of was we'd been running a pilot program for this transit assistance program, which was for low-income fares for qualifying low-income riders. And because we've been doing the pilot project with community organizations for quite a long time, we were able to reach back out to those folks and say, we need to do some more intentional engagement here to make sure that we're asking the right questions of some of the communities that are going to be most affected by this decision. And we were able to get incredible penetration in that market, as well as do a survey that we almost got. We got more than 1,600 responses for in the course of a very quick time frame. And it was because of those pieces of feedback that we actually had really good information for the policymakers to decide about that program and to have a little bit more tools in the box when it came to mitigating some of the impacts of that fare increase. So that was something that, because we had existing relationships, we could tap into those and actually move fairly quickly, even though we certainly would have liked more time to have that long-term discussion. The other thing that I wanted to highlight for you is we are looking for opportunities to provide additional guidance for staff related to certain key constituencies. So one of the things we did when we created this public engagement plan was we worked with a consulting firm, Grassroots Solutions here in town, to create some best practice strategies for implementing this plan. And so they've given us a lot of tools to use that have been fairly well used as we've been rolling all of this out. But we are coming in contact with new situations where we don't necessarily need a wholesale new policy, but we do need guidance for staff related to reaching certain communities. One of those things is related to tribal consultation. So you may have noticed that a couple weeks ago, the governor signed an executive order related to tribal consultation, and the council is included in that executive order. So we are now going to have to create a formal policy around that. But we have been working for the past 3 years to develop relationships with tribal communities to begin that process already. So we have a lot of information that we've been gathering from tribal leaders, and we can bring that to bear on this broader conversation related to the policy, but also provide really specific guidance for staff about how they can implement that policy. That will be something that we'll be discussing in the coming months as we put some of those materials together. Then the last thing that I will mention, and this is a little bit trickier, but as an organization that values data and that values accountability as it relates to how we're doing and measuring the impact of the work that we do, we're implementing various methods to measure the impact of our engagement. And it's not quite a quantitative function like you would expect a lot of this to be. It's not just about counting people or meetings or the things that we've been able to do. It's really about measuring how participants in the process felt about the way that their participation influenced the ultimate decision, whether they were respected, some of the principles that you saw on the screen before. Was it transparent? Did they understand how they could affect the ultimate decision? Did they feel included, and did they feel respected in that process? Things like that. So we're regularly, when we have engagement, asking those questions of participants, and as a continuous improvement process, rolling that right back into our processes moving forward. So when we hear that something worked or didn't, we're adjusting to make sure that we're being conscious of that moving forward. I will only mention one additional thing that has also been a fairly new phenomenon, and is something that we like to do when we can, and that's put resources directly into community to support engagement. So over the course of the last couple of years, we've been partnering with MnDOT on the I-94 project, where they're rethinking the corridor and looking at some long-term improvements, particularly through the central cities. I probably don't have to tell you the impact that constructing that highway had on the communities that it went through. As a result of that legacy, we wanted to make sure that there were some intentional choices being made to support community and having a conversation about the impact of a highway like that when it goes through that. MnDOT may be concerned about the surface that people are driving on, but the council has a little bit more of a broader interest in community impact and livability issues. So we wanted to make sure that we spent plenty of time talking about some of those things, and we were able to provide contracts for engagement to 6 community organizations as part of that process. So we were spending our money in a way that lifted up the voices of the organizations in that corridor and brought really interesting and important points of view, not only to the council, but to the MnDOT process as they're prioritizing how they're going to spend resources on that roadway as well. So that's a piece that is also noted in this engagement plan and has been something that we've been able to do in the past few years. With that, I will stop talking and ask if you have any questions of me. The other thing that I will say while you're thinking about your questions is if there are specific issues that you are interested in exploring more as it relates to this plan, I would love to hear from you. I know Meredith would love to hear from you. And we've been thinking about some ways that we can engage you in the refresh of the plan. So that will be information that will come to you, but I'm very open and interested in your ideas as well. Thank
Thank you. Good presentation. Can you give us a couple examples of the I-94 grants and what they did?
We certainly, Madam Chair, council members, we supported some pop-up meetings and neighborhood conversations in the Union Park District Council, which is, for lack of a better, it's sort of by Snelling and I'm trying to think. I think it goes all the way over to Lexington, but kind of in that area along the highway, where they talked about um, access to the roadway and the impact on the surrounding community of traffic and things like that. So the district council in that community sponsored conversations around those issues and collected data from residents and provided that as part of the project. We also had, we provided some money to Hope Community in Minneapolis for some organizing around the impact of construction on local communities. And they had some really amazing conversations. I would love to talk to you guys more about that, but really amazing conversations because while the immediate work was about the I-94 project, the 35W project was actually happening at the time that they were having these conversations. So there was some really relevant experience that they were talking about right then. So the impact of construction, they had community conversations. They had some art installations where they had people expressing themselves that way. But it was really, really just like eye-opening experiences, and I think that the MnDOT staff would say the same. And we had an event at the end of the project where we had every one of the vendors that were part of this process present their findings, and the MnDOT staff were present as well, and they were really grateful for the opportunity to learn from the experiences of the community organization.
Okay, one quick follow-up, and then we'll move to member questions. So what were the size of the grants?
We had a total of $178,000. So they ranged from $10,000 to $35,000, and they were different for each organization. We had a competitive bidding process, so they submitted their projects and they were evaluated. The evaluation panel was MnDOT staff, council staff, and community members who were all part of the process of looking at those projects and deciding generally how much money to give each one. But the projects themselves requested the money that they needed to do the studies that they wanted to do.
Thank you. So on the list so far, I have Councilmember Lee and then Councilmember Lilligren. If you want to get on the list, Liz is making one. So Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Michelle, for all the work that you and your team and department does. On your page 4 slide, at the top there of what you learned, I just want to, first I have a comment and then a question. My comment is that I really appreciate you highlighting the community's, valuing the community members' experiences and expertise. As a child of refugees, as soon as I could command the English language cognitively when I was 5 or 6, I began interpreting for my parents at my own parent conferences, interpreting to navigate the welfare system. That kind of lived experience, I can never trade for a PhD in public policy. And we have to remember to appreciate that kind of lived experience in community members. And so my question to you is, what are we doing to ensure that all of our staff members who interface with the public and in engagement appreciate that, and that they're truly ready to receive feedback and engagement from the public?
Ms. Fury.
Thank you, Councilmember and Madam Chair. So of course, one of the criteria that we have when we put people in place to do engagement is that they understand the value of the people that they're interacting with. So that's one of from a professional point of view, that's an expectation that if you're going out to talk to the public, that you need to respect the expertise that they bring. That being said, we're also putting things into place to have more of an ongoing training, not just for the core outreach staff that are going out, but for others who are regularly interacting with the public, so that they can have a little bit more sense of comfort going in front of folks, because it can be a pretty intimidating process, but ultimately we want to make sure that we're building those skills so that people are becoming more adept and more comfortable with that. It's a difficult thing to do, but it is certainly a key priority for us to make sure that we're training our staff and making sure that they know that and that they understand that sensibility.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lilligren.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Fury, thanks for the report and for your work on this. And I have a question around the new guidance on tribal consultation. And I'm just wondering, I know it's new, very new, and so I'm wondering what kind of thought has been given to the impact of the guidance on the region where there are no tribes and there is no tribal land or tribal nations?
Ms. Fury?
So, Madam Chair and Councilmember, I appreciate the question. That's a pretty critical piece. One of the things that we've already been talking about, largely from the feedback that we've gotten from folks who we've already consulted with in creating some of the guidance that we've been working on, is that there's really these two areas of importance. One is the formal role, where if you have property and you are part of a federally recognized tribe, then you have standing as a member of that nation. That is relevant in the metro area, but it is only relevant in parts of the metro area. There are many folks who are Indigenous and Native American who live in the region, and they need to be consulted in a way that is meaningful, right? So we're going to have both of those things addressed in this guidance, and making sure that we understand from a cultural perspective how we do that, right? So I think that's pretty critical to make sure that we're not just limiting ourselves to the tribes that are in the region, but also the people that live here, and making sure that they have the opportunity to participate as well, and in a way that is meaningful to them, not just a way that is easy for us.
Thank you, and Madam Chair, that's very encouraging, Ms. Free, of a response to acknowledge that with the 11 federally recognized tribes within the state of Minnesota, there are many times that tribal representation within the population of the region. And some areas, City of Minneapolis, for example, has memos of understanding, memos of agreement with the Native community that acknowledges exactly that point that you just raised and establishes a framework for more formal interaction, more formal engagement between the community. And so I'm very interested in being part of this conversation as it goes on, and supporting your efforts.
Great.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just to that point, Councilmember Lilligren, I'm also very interested in the feedback from the members, and as we move towards our retreat and potentially break up into some kind of work groups, this would potentially be one. So everybody can kind of think of, there could be a couple topics we talk about and that you're interested, that you could sign up, and I don't know exactly what we're going to call them, ad hoc or work groups, but we want people to be able to work on some of these issues, right? It's really important. We also, it affects some of our upcoming lines that we're working on, the Riverview Corridor, for example. So, good points. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for the effort that you're doing on this project. I really appreciate it. Just thinking of my own experience in doing engagement with communities that have traditionally have been disenfranchised or have lack access to circles of power. And one of the things that we always found is, if we are going to talk to a community about a specific issue, health, and we have community members bringing other issues that are not even remotely related to health. That's an opportunity to have engagement and to have them have ownership in the process. If they feel that we're listening to them on things that are not related to the Met Council's mission, but then we also need to do something with that information. For example, in my own experiences, if they were bringing issues that were absolutely outside of the purview of the organization that I was working with them, my standard response will be, thank you, and I will forward your concerns to XYZ, and I will let you know what they tell me about your concerns. Not that you need to do that work, but that we are listening and actually acting on their concerns on those. Is that part of the engagement that you've thought about, and how is that going to work as you move forward with this program?
Ms. Fury.
And Chair, Councilmember, thank you for noting that. That is a pretty critical value of any government organization, in my opinion, that just because we don't do the thing doesn't mean we can't forward on critical feedback to that other organization. We all know who does what, like we know, and we just need to be good neighbors, really, in connecting folks to the right resources. So when staff hear these things, we're definitely encouraging them to connect with the right organization, but to also hear it and to be present and to use that information to the extent that we need to, because we can always learn from something that someone says. I would also say that we often, especially when we're just building relationships, go to an organization or to a group or to even people, a handful of people, and ask them what they need from the partnership, as well as, talk about something that we might be looking for long term. But we often go to them before we actually have an ask. And it will be either in an opportunity to inform them about how the transit system works, or to provide general information about something that we know about, or bring other partners from government along, just to make sure that we're lending value to them before we're actually asking to do something for us. So as much as we can do that, we try to do that ahead of time, just because of what you say, that it's not just about the thing that we need, it's also about just creating better understanding about how government works.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Chair. And I have a lot, so I'll email you guys later. But a couple of things I really want to recognize. What I'm guessing is some of the work that the field work that Nexus Community Partners contributed to this, in the understanding of the difference between outreach and engagement. So I'm really glad to see that in here. I think this is a very important piece to have. I also want to recognize that policy and guidelines get us so far. They're an essential building block and a first step, but it really comes down to practice and culture of an organization to bring these things to life. With that in mind, I think as you go further into this more authentic approach to engagement, you'll start to experience things like, and I think that Councilmember Gonzalez was getting to this, engagement fatigue, or the perception of extraction of expertise and knowledge without truly reciprocal relationships in communities. Another thing that I think we are already experiencing to some extent, in my very humble 45-ish days, is that where we are on the job? Technically, maybe something like that. Is the need to just also think about the intersection between communication strategy and engagement. The things that I think could really aid us in this is incorporating some of the practices of the spectrum from the International Association of Public Participation. I've shared this with staff. I think it's just really helpful for us to coordinate on communication between what we're saying and the messages staff are supporting with us, or even just between staff and our body. So that we're coordinating and having clarity and a stronger commitment communicated to us, or that we can then share out with the community, with clear ways of how people can stay informed, learn about the impact they've had on a decision or something we're forming, and that we can then deliver on those promises or those commitments we're making. And then that is how I think we build a more authentic long-term piece. I think the power of this is also in that many of our public partners, the county, the state, many state departments, most of the cities are using this approach. So if we do that, we're amplifying their approach, they're amplifying ours, and people sometimes have a hard time knowing where does the Met Council stop and begin, and where does the city or the county or something like that. I think we can just kind of join that larger group. So I hope that's something that would be helpful. And that we can think about incorporating. I have actually heard some staff start to use this language, and it was really nice. It really clarified things. I think of it for transportation folks like a road diet. It just helps to organize things so they flow smoothly. The last thing I would just say is that I'd encourage us to think and push ourselves to understand that we can always have measurable, specific metrics as it relates to engagement. And the thing that you mentioned that made me think of this specifically was the need to expand cultural competency. Here, I think the way that we do that, and I think the way that we also have truly reciprocal relationships with our communities, is to make sure that they're represented in our staff, that they're represented on our commissions and on our councils and on our various boards. And to do that, we need to take a look at the processes by which they get there, and we need to equally value people who bring in diverse networks as a hard skill and expertise and talent, just like it takes other things to do jobs, and that it shouldn't just be something that lives with the engagement people. And when you need that, you call the engagement people or you reach out to that community group. But that's the future for us. Every job needs to have that as a core competency, and we should be measuring that, and not just in hiring, but in performance reviews and opportunities for promotions.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, comments?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks for your great work. The question I have, how diverse our outreach team is, and I'm just also curious, how many languages do they speak, just to see their competency with dealing with immigrant community.
Ms. Fury.
Madam Chair, council members, so the team here at the at regional administration that supports the long range policy, we have one non-English speaker who is bilingual, and she speaks Spanish as well as English, and she regularly corresponds with others in Spanish. It's actually kind of fun to listen to her talk to people on the phone. And we also have access to, throughout the council, non-English speakers who help us with materials and in some cases planning. So these aren't necessarily outreach staff, but they are people who represent, certainly other points of view, but are also non-English speakers, which is super helpful. We have previously had others who speak a language other than English, but currently at this time we only have one who is bilingual. There are other teams throughout the council, the Metro Transit team, the team at the project offices, and then staff who are supporting programs specifically who are also non-English speakers. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I'd say between a quarter and a third of those people represent people who have second language experience, but are also culturally diverse.
Okay. Councilmember, are you finished, Councilmember Musa?
Yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Atlas, Ingebrigtsen, and then Ferguson.
Just a quick follow-up on that question. I want to make sure I understood the response accurately. So are you saying that we have non-translation and interpretation staff who are not a part of the engagement team who are providing translation and interpretation services is not a part of their role?
No, Councilmember and Madam Chair. These would be people that we consult with as we are planning. And when we need translation and interpretation services, we contract those. We have a handful of regular vendors that we use to do those, and to perform those services for either in-person events or for materials that we need to have translated. But the thing that they do help us with in some cases is checking the accuracy of those translations. So there are specific terms that the council uses that are not generally easy to understand. The term equity, for example, almost always gets translated in a financial sense as opposed to in terms of cultural identity. So we sometimes have them double check that stuff for us or do a plain language review before we send it out for translation because they have expertise in a second language.
That's the consultants do that.
The staff do that, perform that informal role for us as we're getting ready to do to hire consultants to do translation and interpretation. Okay. I can talk to you more about how that actually works. It's merely an extra check that we have to make sure that we're not doing something that would be either completely misunderstood or inappropriate in terms of how we make sure that if something needs to be translated or otherwise interpreted in a second language, that it's clear.
Okay, and I'm going to go to Councilmember Ferguson, and then if I don't see any other hands or Liz doesn't, then we're going to move on to our next item. Councilmember Ferguson.
So just one, I guess, maybe final thought. I served on the Quarters Opportunity Policy Board, and I think one of the things that was interesting when I first presented to it before I was on the policy board, I think there was only one person of color out of the 30 or 40 people on the board. And then we actually, Rapa and others joined the board. So that was sort of the beginning of that learning process, was that even the group that was supposed to be thinking about this change was not diverse in itself. But one of the things that, we at that group talked a lot about the disparities and the challenges that we have as a region. Most of those numbers haven't changed. So I think we should look at engagement as a step in the process to having better outcomes in the region, as opposed to being excited about having better engagement. Mm-hmm. Because if we have better engagement and yet the numbers don't move, and we still have huge disparity gaps. In fact, they're getting worse. Then maybe our engagement's not really working the way we want it to work, because ultimately the goal of the work that we all do is to make those disparities smaller and make our economy stronger and move people forward. So I would say that someone who served in that original group, one of my frustrations as I look back 10 years now, that really, for all the work that was done, really the numbers haven't moved, and that's highly frustrating.
Thank you. Ms. Fury, any response or?
No, I think that's a fair assessment that it absolutely needs to point to outcomes. And if we're not really doing that, then we need to sit back and think, should we be doing it instead?
Yeah, I think, members, this is a big, big topic, right? And I think it's something we're all really, really interested in. So as we move forward, we need to work with the regional administrator and with the staff and try to figure out how we can move the needle on this. And I think we've all been involved in community engagement, and honestly, some of the things, we have a couple lines out in the East Metro, and the pop-ups and stuff just don't quite do it, right? It's not enough. And so I think but you're doing a lot of good work. You've done a lot of good work, but there's more good work to do, and I think we definitely want to have the council involved in that. So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, next we will have our final item is the introduction to Equal Opportunity Council Equity Overview presented by the Director, Cynthia Jordan, and staff. Welcome to the council. Now I just want to give the members a heads up. RA, is this about an hour long or so?
I would defer to Cy Jordan. It's about, I think, 40-ish slides, and so that depends on any questions you all have as well.
So we'll try to get through it. I still like to try to get through the presentation because often the questions people are asking are in there. But just so you know, we want to listen carefully. And I noticed one of the members noted the page that the question was on. So what I'd like to do is try to get through it and then have a really good discussion afterwards. So welcome.
Thank you, Chair. And so we will be mindful of time and try to get through our slides, not rush through them, but we have worked through to make sure that we are moving forward quickly through the slides, and we'll leave some opportunity for questions. And so, again, my name is Cy Jordan. I am the Director of Equal Opportunity. This is the first time we've come before the full council, and so I want to give you just a brief overview of the services that our office provide. And again, I'll be very brief. I'm not going to go through each of the duties, but be specific in the areas that are not presenting before you today. So we've broken down our presentation into 3 additional areas. One would be the small business unit. They'll speak specifically to their DBE involvement, and then more broadly around MPUB. And then they'll also talk about some of the general work that they're doing and moving forward. With our third presentation, it's going to be the light rail transit unit, and they also heavily are engaged in DBE specific to the light rail, and they'll talk briefly about that. And then we'll have an overview of our equity work. Certainly we'll have opportunity to come before the council in the future and also present individually. We do have some written responses that we're currently engaged in providing to council members as well at this time. And so with that, I won't go through each of the first few slides. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to understand the structure of our Equal Opportunity Office and our roles that we provide. And so we have currently 17 active staff, and one of which is funded through the Southwest, through the project office, actually, for the Southwest Light Rail Project. And with that, we have 4 broad units. We have our small business unit, we have our light rail transit unit, we also have our investigation resolution unit, and then our equity unit. We provide roughly 8 overarching areas of services. We are at our base compliance focused, and we provide services around our ADA work for accessibility for actual physical structures, and programs and services. We provide Title VI planning. We also provide, through our small business unit, they'll talk more about our compliance that we do in certifications, but in addition to that, we have our internal MCUB program. And then with our light rail office, again, it is the DBE services for that specific project that is currently active. With our investigation resolution unit, we have a broad range of services that involve internal and external
actual investigations around discrimination and harassment policy. We provide affirmative action planning. We also go through some very detailed work around resolution throughout the council, consultations around employee accommodations. We provide services for the public as well as internally. And so those are the highlights of those areas. We, in addition, have our business analyst that supports our unit as well. Because this is the first time that we're coming before the full council and our staff are located in various offices around the region, they're here at Robert Street, but they're also in Minneapolis at the Haywood office. They're in St. Louis Park as well as Golden Valley. Those who could be here today are here, so I want them to stand up and be able to be visible. So those from the small business unit, if you could please stand. And from our light rail unit is not here. From our investigation resolution unit, well, actually, we do have a light rail here. Our investigation resolution unit, and then we have our equity unit that is here as well. They don't know that I missed anybody, so I wanted them to be at least visible to you, and certainly they will be reachable to the councils. We have our individual meetings with members as well. With that, I'm going to have I'm going to have Elaine come up, who is the supervisor of our small business unit.
I'll go by Tracy too, that's okay. All right. Chair, council members, good afternoon, early evening, I guess. Thank you for allowing us to be here. I'm excited to talk a little bit about our 2 small business programs that the council manages. Everything that the small business unit does is basically dictated by the policies, procedures, process, goals that we have around these 2 small business programs. I'm going to touch briefly about the two programs and describe the differences between the 2. First of all, the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, DBE, which many of you know, is our federally mandated program. It applies to all contracts, procurements that are federally assisted. The Metropolitan Council Underutilized Business Program, MCUB, you'll hear that acronym a lot. That is the Metropolitan Council's own small business program that applies to anything that is locally funded. Both programs, the goal, they strive to ensure an equitable participation of minority, women, and underutilized businesses in council projects and procurements. And again, both are distinctly different, basically by their funding source. DBE is federal, MCUB is strictly local. DBE, I'm just going to touch base on DBE real quick, just to give you an idea of what that program looks like. Again, the DBE program applies to anything that is FTA assisted, and also would be anything that the funds that come from EPA that funnel through PFA, the Public Facilities Authority. DBE applies to those projects as well. My team does a little bit of everything in terms of certification and compliance. In terms of certification, my staff reviews, processes, and certifies DBE firms on regularly on an annual basis. We certify probably about 50 firms a year. Obviously, there's more firms that are certified than that, but it's in partnership with 4 other agencies. So my staff alone will process approximately that many. We also set contract-specific goals on our projects. DBE goals are applicable to procurements that are both federally assisted, over $50,000, and have subcontracting opportunities. On any given day, my team manages compliance on approximately 100 FTA or EPA-assisted contracts. That's not including the locally funded ones. Just to touch base on the triennial goals that are set for the DBE program, again, this is a requirement through the program that we must set a triennial goal on both the FTA funded and EPA funded. Right now, our goal for FTA funded contracts for the 2017 through 2020 triennium is 15%. We're on track to meet that according to the numbers through 2018. Our EPA goal is 14%, and again, we're on track to meet that. This process of setting those triennial goals starts approximately six to 8 months before they're actually due. We start collecting the data, so in probably February of 2020, we'll start collecting data, analyzing it, and trying to come up with a goal that we'll set for the next triennium. That will come before the council probably in July for approval or further discussion. And next I'm going to touch base on MCUB and go into a lot more detail about this program because it is a council-based program that we have a lot of efforts that we've put toward recently. The MCUB is, again, it stands for Met Council Underutilized Business Program, was created to create a level playing field for the underutilized firms that we serve. The key details of this program versus the DBE program is that, again, it's just for non-federally funded procurements, local procurements. It is only applicable to Minnesota-based firms, and we use an already existing certification. So it's not a separate certification. If you're already certified as one of the certifications listed there, you qualify as an MCUB. To talk a little bit about the timeline of how kind of the journey of the MCUB program. The program was created in 2012 and has progressed through today under, as we progress, we are keeping in mind the vision of One Minnesota with Governor Walz. We expanded the program in 2016 due to seeing that there was more opportunity than just goal setting on construction contracts. We expanded it to goal setting on also professional technical and architecture and engineering. In 2018, after the disparity study was done, the results of that study brought awareness to the fact that we needed to do more. We initiated a second phase of the expansion of the program, which I'll talk more about in the upcoming slides, but basically implemented the sheltered market program from those efforts, added another certification to the pool, and in 2019 assigned council-wide purchasing goals. The next few slides go into much greater detail about the different phases and different steps of how the MCUB program has progressed throughout the years. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with these. They are on the presentation in front of you for you to review as you wish. I want to talk a lot about the disparity study. It's very important that the disparity study, when agencies have small business programs that are race and gender based, disparities provide legal framework that the agency can reasonably defend their efforts on why they have these programs. The Met Council participated in a disparity study with 8 other agencies in 2017. The results came out in 2018. The data that we gave the consultant for the study was based on data from, and it was all council procurements, locally funded procurements, from 2011 to June of 2016. So 2016 was not a complete year, but the results from the study showed that there still obviously are disparities between women and minority firms, and the results of this study is what provided us with the rationale and motivation to make some significant changes moving forward. The consultant made several recommendations on how we could do things better at the council. They reviewed our program. It is what initiated phase 2 of the expansion and what has been implemented since approximately October of 2018. So it hasn't been that long since we've taken these additional steps. The study really opened our eyes to the fact that we need to do better. The first piece of the second phase of the expansion of the program was to enhance the doing business page on the metrocouncil.org to provide greater resources for some of these small businesses so that they had a better understanding of how to do business with the council, where to go, who to talk to, what our expectations were. We also increased our pool of MCUB firms to about 2,400 by adding 500 CERT certified firms. And CERT is the certification that is done by this and managed by the City of St. Paul. Now, CERT itself as a program includes small businesses, minority-owned small businesses, and women-owned small businesses. What we took out of the CERT program was just the women and minority-owned small businesses, and that increased our pool by about 500 firms. Obviously, the more firms that we have in the pool, the greater the opportunity we are that we can find somebody to do the work. And we also developed what is known as MCUB Select. MCUB Select is a sheltered market solicitation process for goods and services. When I say sheltered market, that means that if we have at least 3 MCUB firms that are likely to bid on the particular procurement, that solicitation only goes to MCUB firms. It is not solicited to any other firm, which guarantees that an MCUB will be awarded that work. When the disparity study came out and we realized that we needed to take progressive steps to improve our program, we wanted to get some data behind where we've been in the past, and we quickly put together with the mechanisms we had in place at the time, we put together some numbers we wanted to create some kind of benchmark for moving forward. Where have we been, and have an idea of where we want to go. What we found was, with the data that we had, was that we were approximately, by the end of 2018, at about 11.5% utilization in construction. Our direct spend with these firms, which includes everything from purchasing cards to requests for quotes, to just contracts that are awarded directly to MCUBs. Again, these numbers are low, and we know we can do better. I don't want to focus too much on the past, only because we are so focused on moving forward and creating change. In 2019, April 8th, actually, the email went out that we have committed to an 8% of all goods and services be spent with an MCUB, and 12% of all construction and professional technical contracting. This is a huge effort. It's necessary, and I feel the return on investment is going to create a lot of great positive results. Besides the council-wide purchasing goals, my team we have identified several areas for which we need to focus a lot of time and attention to. So of my 4 staff, all of them are dedicated to specific projects around finding out where our specific scopes are that we need to utilize more participation, creating potential workshops. We're in the process of creating a forum of certified firms to get them to the table to help us understand what their needs actually are, instead of us making the assumption that we know what they need. We are also in piggybacking on the announcement of the council-wide goals. We have created in coordination with procurement and communications an internal and an external communications plan. So the internal plan, several emails just went out yesterday to all department heads, letting them know that myself or somebody from my staff will be contacting them soon. And we're going to be starting from scratch and going department to department and talking about MCUB, reinforcing what MCUB is, what the council-wide purchasing goals are, what the expectation is, and how we're going to help them meet those goals, and what the importance of why we set these goals are in the first place. We're in the process of working with IS and implementing technology to ensure that we can accurately track these efforts. Again, we talk about the measurement of these things, and we need a way to be able to accurately track where our improvements are happening. And on a quarterly basis, we're going to be reporting to the management committee, and the results can be broken down by department and division, what we're spending our money on, and I think that's really important as we analyze this process moving forward. The implementation of, implementation of the technology is this close from being finalized. So probably within the next couple of weeks, we'll have that mechanism in place. Again, staff is working to identify purchasing areas where we historically have fell short of historically fell short of having utilization. So whether it be a specific scope, work type, skill set, this is where we're identifying where we need to focus more activity. Again, I touch base on organizing, creating workshops and how to do business with the council. This is something we're thinking that will probably happen on a quarterly basis. We're refocusing our business development. The team is the primary functions of the small business unit is really focused around compliance. And what we're doing moving forward is focusing more on business development. Is that the compliance will never happen if we cannot get the businesses to the capacity level that they need to work on council's projects in the first place. And lastly, we're re-engaging with our community organizations and our small business industry partners. We may not have everything that they need, but there are people out there that can help them that do. So they may not know where their resources are, and we can certainly help with that. Moving forward, again, we're renewing our commitment to the economic our responsibility to equity and economic prosperity to the communities that we serve in the region. We're strengthening our processes and really reinforcing the message not only to staff but externally that we're changing how we do business at the council. Here are some numbers. I just wanted to get these out there. Some numbers that I ran from Q1 already. These numbers are really broken down by the specific procurement type, goods and services, and how these items are procured. And again, keep in mind that the goal for goods and services did not come out until April 8th. So this is actually, the numbers are not too bad considering that this is just genuine effort on our part. We are actually on track to meet that goods and services goal if you look at the numbers from Q1. Next is the contracts. We break it up by contracts for which we have assigned contract goals and contracts for which no goals have been assigned. Again, there are certain contracts for which it's not applicable to assign a goal. That just means that doesn't mean that participation isn't going to happen. It's just not mandated on our part. So right now we're at about 3.4%. That doesn't scare me in the least because most of our contracts, especially construction, are awarded in Q2. And at the end of the year is usually when we see the most reporting as things get paid out and we see that utilization jump. Demographics from Q1. And like I said, Q1, I wanted to just get this out there, but I'm really excited about the work that we're doing. The internal education campaign is really what's going to kickstart these numbers. That is going to go, because council is a pretty big entity, that campaign is going to run all the way from May till June so that we can touch every single department. And from there, I'm excited to look forward to reporting what has happened in Q2.
With that, we'll open it up to questions if you have any specifically regarding our DBE and MCUT program.
Any questions? Councilmember Chambliss and then Jose.
Yes, I just have a question about the MCUB timeline. I like the way that the progress has been happening, and I'm not sure what your process was after you had your disparity study to, kick into action. But it looks like, you're on the road. By having, the MCUB segmented out and targeted in this way, I think you have a much better chance of reaching the outcome. So I think it's great, and I hope it's going to be a successful model for others.
Chair, council members, thank you for the feedback. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Councilmember Musa.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Can you go back the slide that was showing racial makeup of Native, Black, and Indian American? It was, I think, 6 slides back. You can. Yep, so,
Is it that one?
yeah. So it seems to me that combined Native, Black, and I think African American was less than 7. Can you explain more about that?
Council member or chair, council members, I'm sorry. Could you clarify that?
I think I'm seeing right. So it seems to me that the Black is only 4%, and the Hispanics only 3%, and the Natives 1%. So I'm just wondering this disparity, what's going on here? Can you explain? Are there barriers that's out there that needs to be removed, or just want to know more?
Chair, council members, yes, that is absolutely the disparity that I'm referring to. This reflects what we have done in the past and where our disparities lie. And that is also guiding our progress for our actions moving forward, where we see the most need or where our efforts need to go.
Councilmember Fredson.
Thank you, Chair. So in slide 12, there's a reference to MCUB, and it's stating that it's focused on Minnesota firms. And so my understanding then is that firms outside of Minnesota would not be eligible for participation in the program. So I had to follow up.
Chair, council members, yes, that is correct. DBE, the federal program, applies to nationwide firms, but MCUB is specific to Minnesota firms only.
Okay.
Councilmember?
One more, thank you. And then is there a dollar amount threshold and a subcontractor opportunity required for MCUB, or just the federal?
Ms. Ogilvie?
Yes, there is. So when we look at contracts that come across our desk, the threshold is a minimum of $100,000.
Thank you. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to mention, as the chair of the Environment Committee, I've noticed already in my short time as chair, the 2-3 meetings that we've had, that we approve a lot of contracts. Yesterday it was on a lift station construction project and some other product for one of our plants. And so I was just thinking that as these come before the committee, it would be helpful to know whether or not the contract that we are awarding is a DBE company or an MCUB company in the documentation that comes before the committee ahead of time. It would be helpful to keep this top of mind for our committee, I know, and for the council as a whole, to know whether or not we're meeting our target or not.
Ms. Ogilvie?
Chair, council members, I'm not sure where in the process it hits the council. I'm assuming if it's at award time, that goal has already been established. So that information is available in terms of by the time it gets here, it should be available that there is a goal set and what the goal is. I don't see any reason why that couldn't be made available.
Why don't we ask staff to do a follow-up to figure that out, whether it's with the regional administrator or with the environment, with Lisa Thompson, and that they could help figure out the right point to bring that in. Regional Administrator?
Yeah, Madam Chair, council members, at award, when you're awarding construction contracts, I think there is no reason, I think Elaine is right, there is no reason that we could not list whether or not the firm receiving the award is a certified DBE or MCUB, because obviously the award contains the firm and what the goal has been established at, because obviously they are aware of that goal as we establish that. If for some reason I'm wrong about that, I'll let you know, but I'm almost certain that that's the case. There is occasionally business items that come through that ask the council to allow us to issue an RFP for something or to send out a notice for bids. That would be a case where we obviously wouldn't know the firm and might not be able to say the goal at that point, but certainly on the back end, as we're awarding, that's information we can share.
Thank you.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thanks, Chair. One of the things I'm curious about is with programs like this, oftentimes women rise or other ethnic groups, but our largest communities of color are left behind. And we definitely see this here, so it's not a surprise. I'm curious, and I know that you're going to be doing some outreach with businesses to ascertain this, but I'd like to know just kind of what your initial thoughts are around what are the biggest barriers or needs that could be addressed and how could we help. I think to Member Lindstrom's suggestion, getting it in front of us, even when we're doing an RFP, making sure there's been a scan of DBEs and the MCUB list first before we go to RFP would be maybe another thing to do. But what are some of those things that rise to the top for you or that you have heard would make it better or are a barrier that we need to address?
Ms. Ogilvy.
Madam Chair, council members, so several things, and exactly to that point, we definitely see areas of, and especially in the construction industry where we have a lot of work available, but we see the same firms bidding over and over and over again and getting all the work. That is where my team is digging into specific scopes for which we know we have MCUB firms that could be available to do the work. I think the barriers that we know of is that many of these firms may be so small that they maybe just don't have the educational piece behind them to technically bid on a council project. Or most of it is they're not bidding as a prime contractor, they're bidding as a subcontractor. But even at that level, they struggle to put together a competitive quote. Or they may not know that the opportunity even exists. That is where my team is trying to pull in to try to figure out where the opportunity or where the barriers are that we need to address. Is it an educational workshop on how to do bidding or how that process looks? I also know that capital finances can often be a problem. I'm not sure if that's something that we've touched base on it before, but that is an area that there are financial resources out there. It's just pointing them in the right direction to be able to do it. So capital is another big issue. I would say those are our two primary things. Making sure they have the technical capacity to be able to bid, making sure that they know about it. Oh, one other thing I was just going to mention, for these contracts that do not have goals, so there's nothing mandating this prime contractor to hire these MCUB firms. If there's no goal, we identify a list of firms for which my team physically takes that solicitation and emails those firms direct and says, here's a solicitation that you might be interested in, so that they don't have to go to our website and dig through items to try and find the solicitation. We bring it to them. And then it's kind of up to them to bid on it if they want. But there again, they don't have the understanding or the capacity or the technical background to do that effectively. It doesn't work. And that's what we're here to do. That's moving forward our priority.
Councilmember, so are you going to offer classes for people on how to fill out these forms and so forth? I mean, that's what I've seen with other organizations.
Yes, we are.
Okay, and then when will that start?
The timeline hasn't been flushed out yet, but we wanted to have something in place by mid-second quarter.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just actually referring to that same slide of the demographics, I always stress the fact that we need to disaggregate the data even more. The barriers that an African American business owner born and raised in St. Paul may be different from an East African immigrant that just arrived here yesterday as far as establishing a business, or a Latino business owner who's a fourth generation born and raised in East St. Paul versus somebody who just came last week from Guatemala. So I think we need to make sure that our data is more detailed, because the barriers and the needs of those constituencies are going to be different. And if we group them under those large categories, we're going to be missing a lot of those nuances that really go to the bottom line of why those folks are not bidding in our projects. So that's just a suggestion of how you can perhaps change your processes moving forward. Thank you.
Madam Chair, council members, I think that is a great suggestion. That is a really good point in terms of something that I hadn't thought a lot about, but I think that we're going to keep that in mind as we reach out to our community partners, because those are the ones that can help us understand better what their members' needs are, because they see everything from immigrant to firms that have been born and raised here. So I think that's a really good point, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Barber, I think I might have missed you in a follow-up before.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to help answer a question from Councilmember Lindstrom a little bit. I know in Transportation Committee, we do get some of that information, especially on some of the bigger contracts. Especially a lot of those fall into the DBE category, so we do get that information. And so I think you can just reach out to your staff that helps with the Environment Committee to ask that information be added. And also for everyone, if just for a good reference to look at the history in some of these contracts, is we do have a quarterly procurement report, and for some of the different contracts at different dollar amounts, it actually lists the DBE or MNCUB goal, or even if it didn't have a goal, if they're reporting, and kind of can give you some history and perspective on some of those big contracts. This would be very helpful for you to probably go back and look at.
How does one access the quarterly reports? Do you get those reports given to you, or did the council get those? Or
Madam Chair, it comes through the Management Committee is where we get those reports, and so I'm sure we could, make sure it gets.
Yeah, I think if other people want them, what should they request them to the RA, or should they? What do you suggest?
Madam Chair, council members, they are available on our website, but to save you the time of digging through agendas, if you just let your council member support person know that you'd like to receive the latest management report, they can certainly get it to you from last quarter. Going forward, certainly the Office of Equal Opportunity, after presenting that to management, can forward that to all council members. That's not an issue, but if you're looking for back quarters, they are available currently on our website.
Thank you. Councilmember Barber, I know you have, what is it, 6:30 that you're picking the tab numbers?
6:20.
And is that in this room?
No.
Okay.
So.
But there's are there other people in this?
Yes,
the council
Councilmember
involved?
Fredson and Councilmember Chambliss will.
Okay,
so
so
we
we'll
may need to sneak out.
Keep doing that, and we're going to take as many questions as we can, and then we'll do it like kind of a time check whether we want to try to get through the next third and then delay the last third, or if we should delay the last 2/3, which is fine. Councilmember Muse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want you to know many council members at this table have deep ties with underserved communities, and where you can use it as a resource to help, especially with the outreach part. I am aware of the technical, capacity issue with many minority-owned small business owners who would like to access this, but we can brainstorm some solutions. I don't have all the answers, but we're here as a resource. We want it to be successful. We want to, build equity. I know you're committed. I know you're working hard, but it's a very challenging issue, and the numbers are not great right now, but we are committed to help in whatever capacity we can.
Thank you. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair. So we just had Management Committee right before this, And a similar question came up earlier from the chair, Councilmember Ferguson, asking about what kind of roadblocks came up for businesses. And the transportation finance folks did say that there was a cool, innovative example that we did as a council where recently a lot of small firms, when firms are bidding to do work along a rail line, there's an arcane rule that you have to have insurance coverage if you're working on anywhere within 50 feet of a rail line. Most firms don't have that kind of random but expensive insurance. And so the council had decided that we would eat that cost. And it's usually like a couple $1,000s, but we eat the we made a deal with our insurance brokers and we eat the cost and ask them to pay. Sometimes we'll waive the fee or just ask them to pay $100 or a smaller amount. And so my point is, where there's a will, there's a way.
Thank you. Councilmember Ferguson.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick thoughts. One is that I think as we look at the MCOM goals, to a couple of points earlier, we may want to have, maybe it makes sense to have separate goals for the African American, Hispanic, and Native American businesses, because we could achieve the goal, but actually not make any progress towards ending disparities. And I think part of the purpose of doing this and doing the disparity study was to reduce disparities. So if the numbers stay the same as they do in that slide, 90% of the work would go to Caucasian and Asian Americans who in the disparity study did not have disparities, right? So could we think about having a separate goal for the two sides and work on really focusing on some of those other pieces so we can achieve both of those. The second is just thinking about prime contractors. The system's set up to require minority firms to be subservient to a majority firm to be the lead in these projects, which I think there's probably historic reasons why it was written that way when these programs were established 30, 40 years ago. We might want to think about how we can try to encourage minority firms to not have to be, even if they can take on the project as a prime, there's no benefit for them. And we don't get to track that as a win in our system because it's only for most of the contracts. It's only on the DV side. It's really only the subs that are tracked, as opposed to if we're able to get a prime that's a minority firm or a women-owned firm that does the work. There's not that same sort of benefit. So thinking about how we might build it, especially on the non-federal piece, so that we could look at that. The last one is on the payment terms. Just thinking about on the payment terms, one thing we could think about is if we could speed up how quickly we pay these MCUB firms, that will significantly help their ability to manage their cash flow. And so, I think Ramsey County tries to pay within, I think it's like 10 days or so from receipt of invoice. I think we should be, as soon as we get the invoice processed, get the check out as soon as possible. And that in itself, instead of like some government agencies wait 60, 90 days to pay people, that's float that people have to go out and fund. If we can eliminate that, obviously we have cash on the balance sheet. We can make it happen as long as the work's been done, the invoice is approved. Let's get the checks out. That's it.
Thank you. Councilmember Fredson.
I just had a quick follow-up. Thank you, Chair. I had a quick follow-up on that. I'm not understanding why a prime wouldn't get credit.
Councilmember Ferguson.
Sure. So it's a bit of an arcane piece in the way the rules on the DBE side are written, right? So our biggest example in this state used to be was Thor. So Thor had to work as a sub to Mortensen for all these projects because that's how they got credit to meet the goals. If Thor was the prime, Thor would have to go out and hire another minority contractor to do the sub work to meet the goals. So they kept being the sub to a Mortensen. And that's true about most of the way, and it's not necessarily anything we're doing per se, kind of the way the rules have historically been written. We'd need to rethink how we write those rules, but that's the way it is, not just here, not just Met Council, but Viking Stadium, all the other projects are written that way. So other states do it differently, but that's historically been the way it's been done here. So if our firm does work and we are the prime, then we would have a goal. Even though the whole contract in theory is done by a minority-owned firm, you'd have to go out and hire other minority-owned firms to meet the goal, which for most minority firms kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense because we are a minority firm and we're doing 100% of the project. Why would we be required to go and hire another minority firm? So what happens is sometimes people will try to find a majority-owned firm to be the in-between, so then they can be the minority firm on the project, which is not, doesn't really forward our goals, but it's the way people work around it.
Okay, thank you. Good discussion. So it is about 5:55. There's a couple ways we can go. We still have reports, and that would give, by the time we got through those, giving the people who still have the transportation committee meeting some time to freshen up a little or get something to eat before they go into their next meeting. We could try to get through the transit one, but I think I don't know about you, but that's a really important one, right? They're all important. And I know the staff came here, especially for the presentation, but I want to make sure I involve the council in this decision. So input, Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I move that we adjourn so that we pick it up later because a few of us are also going to model cities. They have the annual meeting tonight.
Oh, okay. Metro Cities?
Metro Cities, I'm sorry.
Cities? Okay.
Metro Cities.
Okay. What time does that probably start?
6:30.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Anybody else? Councilmember Atlas Engelbertson?
We'll have a class on saying my last name.
Sorry.
It's all good. It's phonetic. Just don't get nervous.
Yeah, Brett.
Inga and Brett had a son.
Okay.
And then Atlas.
There we go.
No, I really don't want to rush through this content. I think it's so important for so many of us, but I also want to just I want to also just recognize staff and appreciate you coming out. I think it can be really frustrating when you come out for a night like this and have something like this happen. But I just want to say it matters to all of us so deeply. I don't want to shortchange your efforts coming together. This conversation tonight has been so powerful for me. I just wanted to snap my fingers and sit down and take notes as Chris was talking, Councilmember Ferguson. It's those kind of moments where yes. So I hope we can pause and come back so we can really continue this learning together.
Okay, thank you. Well said. So what I'd like to do is thank you and suspend the presentations at this point. We'll come back another time. Hopefully if you leave the next meeting, potentially. We have to see.
We do have some other things committed to the agenda, so we will find a time to slot this back in as soon as we can.
It's important. Thank you again to the staff. We want to make sure we give this the full attention. What I'd like to do before we adjourn is try to get through the reports quickly, just so if people have things they really want to discuss, that they can let us know about that. And so, council members, any reports? Lilligren and Barber.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to report really quickly that on April 18th, I attended the Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Bryce State of the City address, and where his sort of top line issues were affordable housing and homelessness. He committed to that as a priority and highlighted the work of the City of Minneapolis Affordable Housing Trust Fund program. He spoke about creating 3 to 4 more dedicated bus lanes within the City of Minneapolis in the near future, and he spoke quite a bit about what he called economic inclusion. And to quote him, he said the City of Minneapolis needs to do a better job finding specific solutions that under the legacy of institutionalized exclusions of Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, and immigrants, that furthers the economic, social independence of these communities. And I just thought that really overlaid sort of with what we're talking about tonight, but certainly with our work here at the Met Council. Thank you.
Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of things. Yesterday, I attended Carver County Leaders, which is a group of elected officials out in Carver County that meet quarterly. And then we went on a lovely tour of Carver County with Councilmember Ferguson, Fredson, and with the chair. So thank you very much. I think it was a great tour, and people were really happy to see all of you out in the district. And I've heard a lot of really good feedback already. A couple of things. We are doing interviews for both TAC and TAB over this week and next week, and so we'll be putting hopefully recommendations forward to you by the end of next week, I'm hopeful. And then also at TAB, we are doing, there's a generation of a regional solicitation work group that we're looking at to look at the regional solicitation process, and it's a cross-functional group from different areas. We've got a couple of council members, so Councilmember Cummings is going to help with it, and then Councilmember Chambliss will be our alternate for that group, so we've got some council member representation with it as well. That's all.
Thank you. So at some other point, I'd like to know the timeline on that and how that's going to work. I think that's a really good idea to look at the process and how that's going to work.
It's a quick timeline. We need to have something back out by September so that we can inform the next solicitation round. So it'll be kind of an intense work.
Thank you. Anything else? Oh, Councilmember Atlas.
Inga and Brett had a son.
I'm trying to think of Inga and Brett. And a son.
I just want to share that we're also doing Equity Advisory Committee interviews starting this week. I think we'll be this week and next week.
Yep.
And have a lot of great candidates we'll be interviewing. And I also visited with the City Golden Valley's Council last week. Had a great conversation with them with lots of excitement and support for the Met Council. And so I'm looking forward to doing more of those, but just wanted to share their excitement and readiness for all things transit and development. It's really fun.
Exciting. It's great to see you guys out in the communities. And anything else? I know I will just say briefly, I went to the GARE annual meeting, which was 3 days intensive of race equity work, talking everything about how to make plans, to how to reduce conflicts or help with conflicts, to work groups, to all kinds of things. So come back with ideas. I went with Cy and with Mitzi, and so it was great to have other members of the staff there to be able to kind of process, because there was a lot happening for 3 days. And it was a really, really good experience, and hoping to bring some of that knowledge back to the group. So with that, next we have Regional Administrator. Anything? General Counsel?
No.
Anything? Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Then motion and